I studied Chinese Mandarin for 10 years, and after about a decade, I got pretty proficient at it. I was able to have normal conversations, able to talk about abstract topics. In standardized testing, I reached superior levels, is what it was called. And after that much, it wasn't enough for me. So I decided to tackle a new obstacle, which was a dialect of Chinese. And it wasn't just any dialect. Obviously, there's Cantonese, everyone's heard of that. A little bit, I would say the next tier then is like, I think it's called Hokkien or something. I don't know the exact English way to say the word, but it's like called Minanyu, which is like what they speak in Fujian province or in Taiwan also. And then also I would say Shanghai is also there. Dialect is kind of famous. But what I ended up studying was none of these. These ones online, you can find a decent amount of study resources, materials to get you started. They have their own romanization, pinyin system. But the one that I studied is where my wife is actually from, which is Jiangxi province. So it's called Gan, is what it would be called, I guess, in English. But it's basically the language of Jiangxi province, and it's called Nanchanghua, what I study, because the name of the city is Nanchang. So I have never found anyone else online who is from like a different country other than China that's trying to learn this language. That's because Nanchang is not as internationally recognized, and basically there's no one I've ever seen. And having to find resources to study this language, well, first I'll actually get into why I wanted to learn this dialect. The reason is because I learned Mandarin to a high degree, can basically communicate very fluently, and I can understand pretty much everything. But when I went to my wife's hometown for the first time, at that time we were still dating, I realized her family, yes, they spoke Mandarin to me, but with each other, they would still speak in their dialect. And it was a little bit frustrating because I'd studied so much Chinese, I wanted to fully understand what people are talking about around me. I thought, oh, I studied this language for 10 years. I should know everything. But then when they would speak Nanchanghua, I was completely clueless. Like, obviously they're both from the base of Chinese. Like, that's the language. The structure, the grammar is similar. Some of the words are similar, but I could really only guess what they were saying. And I still was only maybe like 5% accurate. Like, I was really clueless. So that kind of motivated me. It made me want to improve upon myself, I guess, and become at least able to understand how to listen and understand what they're saying. And I've been going at it for a little less than a year now. And I would say I'm like, listening comprehension is maybe 70% there. I get the general context of what's going on always. I am able to guess, and then there's kind of some systematic changes to standard Mandarin that go into the dialect. So basically, I'll give you an example. If you know any Chinese, you'll know what I'm talking about, but if you say like the word ting to listen, okay, I'll break this one down. A lot of the tones, they systematically change. The first tone in Mandarin is ting, but these pretty much all, I would say like 90% from what I've seen, 90% of these change into like the equivalent of fourth tone in Mandarin. So ting, well, we'll change that to ting. And then another thing that changes with things that end with ing, a lot of the time, instead of being ing, like the pinyin and ting, it becomes yang, like I-A-N-G. So these are two systematic things that happen. For example, so then ting becomes tiang. Or another thing is, or I'll accentuate that point. So like bing, like, you know, to have an illness in Mandarin, bing. In Nanchang what does that change to? B-I-N-G changes to bia. It's a different tone. I won't get into the tones because that's fourth tone to a tone in Nanchang dialect that doesn't exist. But it became from B-I-N-G to something that sounds like B-I-A-N-G. So to anyone out there who is interested in studying a dialect, and there's not very many resources, because I looked all over YouTube and I wasn't able to find really any advice on how to study dialects. There's maybe some people, some famous YouTubers who have said they speak some dialects, but they never really went through the study methods. So I would say a big one is to find native speaker content. Go on Chinese social media platforms and just try to find any dialect of speakers you can. That's one way. And another way is if you're really getting down in the weeds with it, you're able to find some linguists who have put out reports on the languages. And learning standard Mandarin Chinese first is a very, I would say it's not even possible for me to learn Nanchang dialect if I didn't already know Mandarin. Because a lot of the study resources I've used have all pretty much been in standard Chinese, written in Chinese script. And it's like linguists writing about the structure of the language. So you have to know good enough standard normal Chinese to be able to make sense of what's in those linguists' reports. So I would say if you want to study a dialect first, you need to get good at standard Mandarin. That's kind of non-negotiable, especially if it's a rare one. Maybe you could get away with Cantonese because there might be enough English language resources out there to support your study of Cantonese. But if it's a more rare dialect, if you're thinking to learn, I don't know, a dialect from Yunnan or one from Hunan or I don't know, Zhejiang, just some other, a little bit more under the radar dialect, I would say first you need to learn standard Mandarin, and then the next thing on Chinese social media, try to find as much content of speakers of that dialect, and just first listen as much as possible, get used to the different sounds in the language, and also learn the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. A lot of these linguists' reports, they use the IPA, which is, a lot of native English speakers don't know about it, but it's basically a systematic way to spell things. You know, in English, we have R-E-D and R-E-A-D. They're both pronounced red, even though you have an extra A. Spelling is not perfect, but the IPA kind of makes there less ambiguity. It's more structured. So a lot of these linguist reports for these dialects use the IPA. So learn IPA. And I'll probably talk more on my channel in the future about learning dialects. If there's any interest, I'll talk specifically about learning Nanchang, but there probably isn't. I think that's a big reason I'm the only person I've seen who is studying this dialect, because there's not much demand for it. But if there's interest in that, or if there's interest in learning dialects in general, I've learned it to a decent degree, the dialect that I'm learning. Able to talk also a bit, able to understand a lot, able to talk a decent amount. So if there's interest, I'll make more future videos about that.